Yeah, good day. My name is Dr. Prince Kodua. I welcome you once again to Mktg 305, Consumer Behavior. Today we'll look at section 13. Our focus will be on communication in relation to consumer behavior. We all know communication is an important bridge between marketers and their target audience. It's not enough, it may be, a product may be technically competent, but it can only succeed through communication. So communication is that important. It's communication that we use as marketers to persuade consumers to act in a given way in relation to our market offerings. This session will therefore focus on communication processes and also discuss the key issues that are involved in the process in relation to consumer behavior. And of course, in the process, we'll look at the implication for effective marketing strategy. In terms of outline, we'll explore the meaning of communication, look at the communication process, and how to design persuasive communication, and we'll end by looking at measuring marketing communication effectiveness. It should be possible to know whether our communication has been effective, and how do we do that? We'll look at this in this section. I also expect you to read the chapter on communication based on the references listed at the end of this section. When it becomes useful or important, I'll direct you via Sakai to relevant materials that will aid your understanding of communication in relation to consumer behavior. Talking about communication, it's simply the transmission of a message from a sender to a receiver using a given medium. And when we say medium, I know you understand what we mean. There's several. You can use the electronic medium, personal medium, you name it. Consumers are able to acquire knowledge or learn about products only through communication. We use communication to persuade consumers to act in relation to making purchases, either to making donations, as in the case of social marketing, or even to patronize a particular retail store among other expectations. Communication is that useful across board. It can be used to direct actions. In more specific terms, marketing communication is meant to inform and of course to influence and also to persuade, because today we can talk of competition in virtually all product categories and in all industries. So effective marketing communication will be to give consumers the reasons for purchases by way of informing consumers how to make decisions, and of course to influence their behavior in relation to competing market offering. So it's not enough to have a technically competent product. A technically competent product may not do well if there's no effective communication. Communication may take various forms. We can talk of verbal, as I'm doing. We can also talk of visual, where marketers may make use of the senses of the eye to show symbols and so on that are meaningful to the target market. We can also look at communication in terms of impersonal or interpersonal. Impersonal simply where there's no direct contact. And then we can also talk of interpersonal where communication is done via individuals or personal entities. So interpersonal communication occurs when companies are able to transmit messages through formal sources, could be through their salespeople, or informal sources, such as peers of consumers. But the underlying factor here is that The persuasive impact of communication is the source credibility. In other words, the extent to which the target audience trusts the source as being a salesperson, a spokesperson, or a brand ambassador, or the company from which the communication is coming from. So source credibility is an important consideration for communication. Talking about communication, there are 5 key components that we need to be aware of: the sender, the message, the medium, the receiver, and of course feedback. We need to look at the key issues in relation to these 5 components. Communication itself is a process, and we have different parties playing different roles. And there's effective communication, and there can only be effective communication when there's oneness of thought between the receiver, the sender, and the receiver. And there's feedback back to the sender. So there are 5 interrelated activities when it comes to communication. And different parties perform different roles which are important to marketing efforts. The sender is very important in terms of the success of communication, because it begins with the sender, who is the initiator or the sponsor of marketing communication or marketing effort. The sender, in this case, takes decisions as regards what the message should convey. We may have different marketing objectives, so depending on the marketing objectives, the sender needs to decide what the message must convey. And of course, the sender should clearly identify or clearly know the profile of the one the message is to be sent to. Knowing this, the sender can then encode the message in a way that will be meaningful to the target audience, because different things mean different things to different target audience. So the marketer or the sender has an important duty of clearly knowing the profile or the characteristics, tastes and preferences, attitudes, everything there is to know. In other words, need to have good insight about the receiver, which is the target market, in order to properly encode. Encode simply means putting everything together to make it meaningful to the target market. And then the message to be sent. It could be verbal, it could be non-verbal, or a combination of both. Typically, marketers may combine to provide more information to the audience. Verbal information may come in the form of symbolic communication. For instance, the logos that we use tend to create or are forms of non-verbal communication. The medium, the message, the medium to send message through is also important. The sender needs to decide which medium will be appropriate, and there are several considerations, such as it could be cost, but the most important thing is that the sender needs to know the media habits of the target market, and of course need to also know which one will be more competitive in terms of eliciting favorable responses from the target market. So the decision has to be made depending on the nature of the product and the marketing objectives. The marketer needs to decide whether to employ face-to-face, either email or telephone. These are decisions that the marketer or the sender need to make in relation to the medium to be used. In this regard, it should be clear in terms of the advantages and disadvantages of the various platforms that can be used to convey message to the target market. And of course, we need to also look at the target audience of the message. When we do market segmentation based on our objectives and other factors, and we decide on a segment which becomes the basis for positioning, then we need to think of the characteristics of this target and the abilities in terms of the abilities to decode our message. The target audience usually will decode the message they receive on the basis of their personal experiences and personal characteristics. That is why marketers need to have enough insight about their target market, because marketing communication can be a very expensive undertaking. And therefore, the entire marketing effort may fail if we fail to clearly understand or describe the peculiar characteristics of the target market. We need to be able to know the impact the message is likely to have on the target market, which is the receiver of our marketing communication effort, and also how the ability to derive accurate meaning from our message, and their motivation level with regards to our marketing effort or our marketing communication. Feedback is also important. It's an essential component because it will allow the marketer to either reinforce or to change where possible, or to modify the message to ensure that it's understood in the intended way. Feedback forms may come in terms of verbal or non-verbal. In interpersonal situations as compared to impersonal situations. For instance, it is easier to obtain feedback in interpersonal situations as compared to impersonal situations. This is a model of a communication process where the various components are shown and how they relate to each other. But I realize that feedback is on a different line. It shows which is an important element in the entire communication process. There are some barriers that affect effective communication. In other words, these factors affect the accuracy with which consumers or receivers give meaning to the messages they are exposed to. The most prominent one is what we call selective exposure and psychological noise. In today's competitive marketplace, it's important for us to know that consumers exercise selectivity in terms of the messages they choose to pay attention to. And this has several implications for marketing effort. It happens when consumers, although they may be exposed to many adverts of companies, decide to only carefully read or listen to adverts that are related to products they are interested in. And they tend to ignore those they are not interested in. Technology has even worsened the situation. It has provided means by which consumers control the level of exposure they have in regard to marketing effort or marketing communication. And marketers need to look for clever ways of keeping their messages exposed and receiving the needed attention from their target audience. We can also talk of psychological noise. This relates to clutter in the marketplace. There are several stimuli in the marketplace today craving for the consumer's attention and tend to affect how messages are consumed. It tends to detract consumers' thought pattern in relation to marketing offers or marketing communication. it affects the reception of promotional messages because of the numerous exposures or the numerous stimuli in the marketplace. This makes it extremely difficult in today's marketplace for consumers to retain and sometimes even to recall, to retain and recall what they've been exposed to. This poses a lot of marketing challenges. Some strategies can be used in this regard. For instance, marketers can do we are saying that repeated exposure to advertising messages is one way of overcoming psychological noise and also selective exposure. But too much repetition can lead to what we call advertising wear out. So marketers need to make decisions in terms of the number of exposures, the number of repetitions they undertake with regards to promotional effort. Through digital technologies, marketers today are able to monitor the consumer's visits, say, to websites, able to infer their interests, and design and send customized messages to consumers. In designing persuasive messages too, we can also look at the message. What is it? It's simply a thought. It can be an idea, attitude, image, or any other information that the sender wishes to convey to the intended audience. It will allow us to send information about, say, product characteristics, prices, locations to our target audience. By in doing this, the marketer must first establish the objective of the message. Of course, the objective will determine how encoding will be done, the medium that will be most appropriate. So the objective must be well established. And of course, beyond establishing the objectives, there's the need to select an appropriate medium. Because like I said earlier on, different segments have different media habits and tend to pay attention differently when it comes to the various mediums they have. The third point is that marketers need to design a message that is appropriate for each medium, because different medium will require different formats in terms of how messages can be designed. So a lot of consideration has to go into that in terms of the objectives, whether it will help in achieving the objectives of the communication. There are several objectives that may be pursued. The objective, for instance, of a persuasive message may include to create awareness, depend if the product is new in the market, or new features or benefits or attributes have been introduced. The objective in this regard may be to create awareness. It may be to promote sales in terms of stiff competition, or where there's dwindling sales, the objective may be to promote sales. So the choice will depend on the objectives. Or where the marketer wants to encourage certain practices. Let's say, how to keep maybe a gadget tidy and so on and so forth, or clean after use. That could be the objective. Or the objective may be to attract retail patronage. So that there could be several objectives, and that will inform other things that the marketer need to do. In designing effective marketing strategies, there are certain considerations. One can be the images and text to be used. The marketer needs to decide on the text or image or a combination of both, because the characteristics and the objectives will determine what will be most appropriate. For instance, messages that depict images are often more effective than those with text only. I mean, this is not always the case, but this is an observation. This is why we sometimes say that one picture is worth 1,000 words. But of course, again, depends on what is to be done or the nature of the product being marketed. Sometimes marketers rely on the situation surrounding the target audience and then words or phrases that reflect or seem to solve these situations in the advertising. These days, it's common for marketers to use words like simple, easy, clear, and what have you. This is just to depict how their product will not add more troubles to already busy lives that the consumers find themselves in. In Ghana, financial institutions in relation to loans or opening account tend to use words like simple, easy, and all that because of the peculiar situation in the financial services market. Another consideration also has to do with message framing. You are saying that this occurs when a marketer stresses the benefits to be gained or lost from using a specific product or not using that product respectively. What to be gained and what is likely to be lost. Message framing is positive, for instance, when the marketer stresses on the benefits to be gained from using the product. And message framing is also negative when the emphasis is on what to be lost for not using the product. Which one is effective, and when do we use any of these? So how to frame the message will depend on consumers' attitudes, the characteristics, as well as the product itself, whether it lends itself for positive framing or negative framing, or both. Based on observation, we are saying that positively framed unreliable messages are less persuasive than negatively framed unreliable messages. That's all things being equal. And also, negative message framing is more effective than positive framing. The condition is when respondents have less opportunity to process the advertising information. In other words, negative message framing will be useful when there's limited time for information processing. Negative framing may be useful. But it will be less effective when respondents have opportunity to process the content of the ad. In other words, it's not advisable to use negative framing when the consumers are likely to, they have ample time, enough time to think of the benefits or the features of the product being marketed. Another issue we can also look at is what we call one-sided versus two-sided messages, whether we should go for a one-sided message or a two-sided message. What do we mean? A one-sided message is one that allows a marketer to pretend that the product on offer is the best in a given product category. It allows to make that kind of assumption that is the best in a given product category. A two-sided message, on the other hand, tend to acknowledge the presence of competing products. Now, which of these should one use and under what circumstances? Some marketers, based on observation, only stress the positive aspect of their products and pretend that competition does not exist. But in cases where competition is obvious or becomes obvious, the advertiser or the marketer is likely to lose credibility from the target audience. The advice is to use a one-sided or two-sided, or the decision as to whether one should use one-sided or two-sided message depend largely on the nature of the audience and competition. One-sided messages are usually effective where the audience are friendly, but if the audience is critical, unfriendly, or highly educated, then a two-sided message is recommended, because highly educated target market will want to make more rational decisions based on competing offers, by competing benefits and features of various products in a given category. In designing persuasive messages, another consideration is what we call the order effects. In other words, the marketing communication. What should be the order of presentation to the target market? The question is whether to present something first or to present last. So whether it is presented first or last, whether the message is presented first or last, has the ability to capture audience interest. Researchers have noted that material or messages presented first produce or tend to produce greater effect. And this is what we term the primary effect. It's based on observation. Others are also of the view that messages presented last are more effective. And this is also termed the recency effect. With regards to this observation, for instance, magazine publishers charge more adverts on the front and back covers of magazines than for the inside pages because of their greater visibility and recall. And most marketers may want to achieve this effect. Order is also important in terms of listing product benefits because of what we call the multi-attribute multi-attribute in relation to decision making. Consumers consider several attributes or benefits and rank them in making a decision. So if the interest of the audience is low, the most important point should be made first in order to catch attention. Though the recency effect may be useful, we are saying that if interest is low within the target market, it's important that the most important benefit or feature be mentioned first. However, if the interest of the audience is high, the product benefit should be arranged in ascending order, with the most important benefit mentioned last. In terms of advertising appeal, in our quest to elicit favorable responses from the target market, the most widely used appeals include what we call the comparative advertising, fear appeal, humor appeal, and sex appeal. Comparative advertising is useful, especially where the target market are discerning, more discerning, and where the product involved is also a high involvement purchase situation. Marketers need to provide basis for comparison. Critics of this appeal, of this strategy, maintain that comparative ads usually assist the consumer to recall the competitor's brand at the expense of the advertised brand. In other words, caution needs to be applied in using comparative advertising. Though useful in making decisions in a high involvement purchase situation, care needs to be taken. Other than that, attention will rather go to the competing offer. We are saying that this type of appeal has the potential to elicit higher levels of cognitive processing and better recall, because recall is better when there's always basis for comparison. Comparative advertising is likely to be perceived as more relevant than non-comparative ads among more sophisticated consumers. There's also the concern that comparative advertising may mislead consumers and therefore eventually lead to lawsuits against companies. In other words, it's useful, but if one has to use a lot of good judgment, as it has a potential of leading to lawsuits. Marketers may also use fear appeal, which is also a very effective strategy. It involves portraying a risk of using or not using a specific product, service, or an idea. In other words, the marketer will draw the attention of the target market or the consumers to the consequences for using or not using a product, an idea, etc. Low fear appeal, for instance, tend to rely on anxiety. Here, there's what we call an emotional response, which will be triggered as a result of exposure to the communication stimulus. For instance, just like wearing a seat belt can prevent the high fear of death in road accidents. For instance, like wearing a seat belt, we can use this scenario. Wearing seat belt can prevent the high fear of death in road accidents. This may be termed low fear appeal, as it will generate some emotional responses. A high fear appeal may be to say, for instance, always wear a seat belt. Such a campaign may be created or may create more anxiety than low fear appeal. However, low fear appeals tend to cause more anxiety than positive appeals, such as humor. The reason is simple. Individuals are more motivated by fear of losing something than the good of gaining something. In other words, fear appeal can be very effective. It's a common strategy that many marketers use. However, it has to be done with caution, because others do not believe it works. But when it comes to repeat behavior, purchase behavior, it's been observed that fear appeal may not be effective, such as in the case of dieting, and more effective, such as the case of dieting, but it may be effective for a one-time only behavior, including, say, health screening. Humor appeal can also be effective because every one of us tend to love good laugh. But it has to be used at the right time and place in order to earn the goodwill of the target market. Typically, marketers will fashion humor in their advertising messages by adding funny images, symbols, or statements. We are saying that it works best for established brands and then familiar brands, established and familiar brands. Where consumers are not very familiar with a brand, using this strategy may not be effective. It can be confusing. Again, not all products will lend themselves to this kind of strategy, humor appeal. Insurance provider may not find humor appeal useful because of the nature of the service. It tends to be a kind of serious service, and humor may not find a good place in the area of communicating the offer. Non-profit and public health institutions may also not find humor appeal useful. It may be disastrous to use this kind of appeal if the target market do not find the appeal funny enough. It may affect recall, or if they do not find it funny enough, it may not be effective, and also it may only create consumer recall for the advert itself and not the product or brand being marketed. In other words, the focus may be on the humor instead of the brand being marketed. This is because adding product information relegates the humor appeal and also clashes with the joke and leaves the audience confused about the message. Notwithstanding the challenges with the use of humor appeal, when a humorous advert captures attention and showcases the benefits of a product or service, it succeeds. In this case, consumers may have a more favorable opinion of the product or the brand being marketed, and are likely to remember the attributes of the product and may eventually become brand loyalists. Another appeal that can be used by marketers is sexual appeal. When advertisers use immediate appeal or obvious potential to excite others by appearance, style, or charm, we refer to this as sexual appeal. Nudity and other sexual approaches are the most common ways companies use to advertise their products. There are several products that rely, or several brands that rely on sexual appeal because it's been found to be effective. It has the potential of generating attention, which is one way of overcoming selective attention and selective exposure. Companies use sexual appeal in several ways. One is subliminal approach. Another is sensuality. For sexually suggestive approaches, it tends to increase sensuousness by suggesting sexual activity. Nudity or partial nudity is also a popular form of appeal, especially for products that have sexual connotation. Typically, marketers rely on decorative models to execute this appeal. We can also have overt sexuality. In this case, the marketer is blunt in terms of the use of sexual images or actions to sell a product. Of course, companies using this approach need to be aware of the target market and, of course, the ethics of the land. Notwithstanding the benefits of sexual appeal in terms of attracting attention, it has been observed that it can also distract a viewer from the product and brand name itself, therefore making it easy to forget after a few minutes of watching. Just like in the case of humor appeal, though it's useful, but consumers may be distracted. It's been criticized along several fronts. One is that sexual appeal creates dissatisfaction with one's body. I mean, usually marketers tend to use more than models that are extraordinary, and many people within the target market may be affected psychologically. This is because media tend to create an image of what you have to look like to be sexy, which is usually far from the everyday woman or man. In this regard, women tend to feel unhappy about their own bodies, and this may trigger stigma against such products. So again, sexual appeal may be useful, but it has its own negatives. How do we minimize the effect of sexual appeal in advertising? Firms are encouraged to use regular persons as models in their address to help with body advertising. In other words, they need to use sex in a manner that is interesting and not offensive to entice a larger segment. And it has to be ethical too. The ultimate test of a marketing message is the receiver's response, because messages are always designed to trigger or to persuade target markets or consumers to act in a given way. This will mean that the marketer or the sender of the message must receive feedback promptly and accurately in order to achieve marketing objectives. We are saying that feedback in marketing communication is important because it will allow the sender to reinforce or to change the message to ensure that it is understood as expected. At the end of marketing communication, marketers measure the following effects. First, they may want to measure what we call the persuasive effect. They want to use various research techniques to find out how persuasive the message is, especially in a competitive marketplace. They may also want to measure sales effect, what that has led to changes in sale or increases in sale, or whether it has led to a situation or it has increased purchase intention. Marketers may also measure media exposure effect. In other words, you may want to find out whether the target market have come into contact with the marketing communication message. In terms of measuring the effectiveness of messages, we can talk of the physiological measures and also the attitudinal measures. The physiological measures simply has to do with gauging how various parts of the human body reacts to a marketing communication stimulus or stimuli. So we can do what we call the eye tracking through various gadgets. I mean, normally before commercialization, marketers may want to do test marketing because communication can be very expensive undertaking. So marketers may want to find out if it will be appealing to the eye, whether it will attract consumers. So marketers can do physiological eye tracking. They may also do the brainwave analysis. Of course, sometimes they want to find out how the brain reacts in relation to a marketing stimulus. It's important, again, in terms of achieving marketing objectives of attention, persuasion, and so on and so forth. Marketers may also do, under physiological measures, do what we call facial electrography. Again, scientists are able to measure changes that take place in the facial muscle as a result of exposure to a marketing communication stimulus. All these things are useful in terms of deciding on advertisements or marketing communication. Doing this, they are able to gauge the likelihood of success of marketing communication. Attitudinal measures, this one has to do with, or it measures consumers' cognitive responses to messages, which also includes their level of engagement and involvement with the messages being tested. There are some examples. For instance, target audience can be made to respond to a TV commercial in a theater to indicate whether they are interested or they are not interested. Attitudinal measures can also come in the form of self-administered questionnaires, such as maybe through the use of semantic differential skills, where the target audience are in position to register their like or dislike for a given marketing communication piece. What are some of the marketing implications of communications? Marketers need to ensure that the use of words, symbols, and what have you are easily understood by the target market in order to gain the desired action or responses. Feedback is also important. Hence, marketers need to put in place mechanisms to elicit accurate and immediate feedback from their audience. In all this, marketers need to carefully study their target market in terms of all the important characteristics if they are to design an effective marketing communication appeal. These are your references. Thank you.